Coming up today, the state of the nation when it comes to Braille technology.
This is Double Tap, celebrating Braille at 200. Now, here's your hosts, Stephen Scott and Sean Priest.
Hey guys, we're continuing our celebration of Braille at 200. We're diving straight into our conversation today with two guests who are joining us to talk about the state of the nation when it comes to Braille technology.
Hi, I'm Stuart Lawlor, and I am Head of Digital Content here at Sight and Sound Technology.
Hi, I'm Greg. I'm from a company called Paige, who are building a product to try and promote Braille.
Guys, it's great to have you both here on Double Tap, celebrating 200 years of the Braille code. Stuart, it's quite an incredible moment, actually, when you think about it. And when you tell people that Braille is 200 years old, they are often quite surprised. It's been around for a long time, right?
Yeah, it has. And, you're right. We've been kind of leading up to this for a long time. And of course, some people were talking about Braille being 200 years old last year. There's a bit of confusion when exactly Braille is 200 years old. But I think certainly the sources I looked at seem to be talking about 1825. So that's what I'm going for.
Yeah.
And it is incredible that I suppose Braille continues to evolve, just like print, just like everything else. And then with all the technology that we're talking about and using every day, I believe Braille is more relevant than ever.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of why I think it's so important to talk about this. We've had so many interesting discussions about this on Double Tap over the past few months. And we'll touch on some of that, but I think what's more interesting is talking about where we're at with Braille and what it means to you guys. Now, Greg, you're fully sighted, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I often get when I do these kind of conversations, people say, why have you got a sighted guy in the room? He doesn't know anything about Braille. Well, of course he does, because he's been building a technology that's, in this particular case, we're talking about Paige Braille, which is this amazing device which can convert an old Perkins Brailler, which is still very useful today, but into something even more useful. And we have talked, of course, about this in the past, but I want to dig into a little bit more from you, especially, Greg, about your learnings on Braille, because you've been digging into this quite a bit. I mean, you've been interested in this topic. It's caught hold for you, hasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I do feel supremely unqualified to be talking about it, because everyone I meet who uses Braille knows so much about all the different tech and has such a depth of knowledge. So that's the first thing that really struck us when we started talking to people is. And we got started with a charity approaching us with a problem, which is the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust. So they kind of introduced us to the space. And then we kind of went from there and just got more and more interested in it.
And, the interesting thing is, for a lot of people, when they hear about new technology coming along, first thing we think about is, okay, new idea from someone who's had, and I'm guilty of this as well. If you've heard me on the show for long enough, you'll know I'm one of those people who'll say, oh, great, another sighted person coming along with an idea to solve blindness for blind people and solve Braille for blind people. But this idea you had two things that attracted me. One is it seemed as if you had been talking to actual blind people along the way. And secondly, the cost. The cost of your device is actually quite low in comparison to what else is available out there. Of course, it has got a niche use case, but even so, cost is king in our world, right? Keeping the cost down.
Yeah, I think so. The way we approached it is we were looking at all the different barriers to somebody accessing Braille if they wanted to just learn it at home. And so with our product, it's a affordable retrofit for your classic Braille writer. So you just swap out the base of your Braille writer and screw in our board, and it connects it wirelessly to any device for instant translation and gamified learning. And so you're right, we also came at that from just talking to people. So initially we were trying to make a way more ambitious project, as we told you in a previous podcast. We were trying to build this sort of holy grail of like a multi-line Braille display. And we were a team of engineers, and we kind of slaved away at this technical problem. And then when we talked to people, we found every single person we talked to had learned on a Perkins. And so then we thought we could snap off part of what we'd built, put it on a Perkins, and it would have a much broader impact.
And Stuart, when you hear that, I mean, that what Greg is trying to create there, as he says, is the Holy Grail. We've obviously pivoted a little bit here. I know you're still working on this in the background, though, Greg, because I guess that the key to bringing down those costs I always talk about in the show of Braille displays, and now of course we're moving towards multi-line Braille displays, tactile displays, is bringing down that cost of the actual cell itself, and even perhaps reimagining what a Braille cell is and the technology that is used to create it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose just before I talk about that, Stephen, I do want to address, because, I think this is really important, that because we all talk about Braille, you and I, Sean, lots of other podcasts, people who use Braille, people who are visually impaired, blind, say what you will, talk about Braille very passionately. But it's lovely to hear someone like Greg, who came along to this and is as passionate about Braille as all the rest of us and wants equal access. And I think that's really important to celebrate that as we look at 200 years of Braille, to say that there are lots of people who are fully sighted out there working alongside our community to make access to Braille a reality for everyone. It's just really important to say that.
Yeah, and can I just echo that, because that's exactly why I wanted Greg here today, because we're making it all about you today, Greg. But honestly, it's
all about
so,
you, Greg.
But it's so vital. Look, we can't live in a world where it's just blind people on an island trying to do what we do. It's not going to work. We live in a world of sighted people. That is how it works. That is the dominant sense for many people out there, and we have to realize that. And for a lot of people, who are trying to engage with our community, we've got to welcome them in, right? We've got to welcome them in. We watched, of course, with Chris McCausland going on to Strictly Come Dancing and watching the success of that, and a lot of people pointing praise to his dance partner. And I saw many advocates afterwards being quite critical of that, saying, oh, what, a blind person couldn't manage on their own? What, are you saying that I could become a ballroom dancer by myself? I mean, how does that work? It doesn't work. We are dependent on each other. That's part of independence, is dependence.
Yeah. That scares me, Stephen. I do not want to be a ballroom. I would not be able to do what Chris McColgan did, by the way. But sorry, to go back to your question, your initial question about sort of the development and multi-line and it's been interesting to watch. I suppose it's still a small space, and there's a small community working out there to make multi-line Braille a reality, and I suppose to continue to support and develop the single line displays and note takers that we've all come to know and love, and add features and functionality to those. But making multi-line Braille affordable is still a very difficult thing. And the manufacturers that we work with in Sight and Sound, people like Bristol Braille Technology, for example, will say that to you as well. This is not easy not to get, because of course there are so many things that we want from these products, and the cell durability and quality and all that stuff is important. And there's others in the space who are doing great work as well, like Humanware with their Monarch device. It's a very exciting time, but this stuff is not easy to build.
Greg, from a developer point of view, from your perspective, you've been looking into this. Is there a way around the mechanical nature of Braille cells, or are we stuck with that type of technology for now? Is there anything else that can compare, can allow us to get the cost down?
This is a really big topic. If I was giving you kind of very high level, some very common approaches, the classic one obviously is your piezoelectric cells that have been going for like decades now. And they are great, but obviously expensive. And also you can't use them for multi-line because they're quite long. And so the other approach is, if you talk to an engineer and tell them this problem, the first thing they'll say is, oh, can't you just use like a solenoid or something? A little coil of wire with a little pin that bounces up and down. And that doesn't really work, because when you squash it down underneath a Braille dot, it doesn't provide enough force to withstand the user's finger. So then you need this kind of little latching mechanism to keep it in place. And that's effectively what you've got with these new devices coming out, like the Monarch type devices, is some form of like latching solenoid type approach. And there is a wide variety of different ways of doing that. But then they are quite sensitive to ingress. So this was done decades ago. And obviously people would touch them, they'd have messy fingers, it would accumulate dust and grit and things. And so they've now got covers for them with the Monarch and things like that to try and prevent that. And obviously it can't refresh while your finger's on it and things like that. So it's a very kind of, and then there's all these wacky approaches that go completely beyond that are whole new technologies. So it's just an enormous topic.
It's interesting. There's some interesting work coming out of the University of Michigan. Professor Alex Russomano, I think if I pronounce it, and Dr. Sheila O'Moran, who's from Ireland. So we're kind of keeping track on that one. And they're developing a multi-line braille display that is powered by air. So it has a pump as part of the device. And they are using, and I have not seen this yet, by the way, but they're using, I think, air bubbles to create the to make the pins go up and down.
Wow. That's quite ingenious,
Yeah,
actually,
now
isn't it?
I think it's not, yeah, and it's certainly not at the moment anyway, it's not a portable display. So this is something that you'd use on your desk, and you certainly wouldn't be taking it anywhere. And I'm not sure as well about the noise factor, because the pump obviously needs to be on. So I don't really know, long term. Yes, if you were going to be at a desk all the time with maybe an 80 cell braille display, or 5-line display of 40 lines, 40 cells per line, maybe. But I think most people nowadays expect something a little more portable.
The challenge for me, it would appear, is that there's nothing really that joins Braille to what would be classed mainstream technology.
I guess, yes, you're right. And Braille is such a niche area, even in the blind community. Let's say the numbers of people who are using it are still a lot lower than we all might like. But, bear in mind that, if we go back to the 80s and devices like the Braille and Speak, and these, at the time were note takers, people loved their Braille and Speak and Braille lights. They were the forerunners of things like the Palm Pilots, that then sighted people. I remember a friend of mine in maybe early 2000s had a Palm Pilot device, and these were considered to be very cool. But these were around after we all had these portable note takers.
Stuart, what does Braille mean to you? I know this is a question being asked a lot through this period of time. People asking, long-term Braille users, what Braille means to them. What does it mean to you?
I think it means equality. It means being able to do my job. I'm thankful to Braille that I'm sitting here, talking to you today. That I would not have, let's say, the confidence to go and deliver a presentation and feel I was an equal in the working world without Braille, and even in college. I mean, I studied music a very long time ago. Thankfully, for everyone's benefit, I don't do a lot of music anymore. But when I was, and we were studying, 4-part harmony, and I was able to read that using Braille music, admittedly rather slowly, but I had it in front of me. Those things can't be underestimated. And yes, you can do everything by ear, and we have so much technology nowadays. One of the things, though, I always cite, Stephen, and I spoke to you about this off air last week, was that I see so many times now people who learnt Braille years ago when they were in school, and then for various reasons, and it's understandable, they went off and did other things and didn't really need it, or felt they didn't need it. And then I, would see emails from people where there's punctuation missing or in the wrong place, and there's a lack of capital letters, and you always know the people who maybe are lapsed Braille users. And there's something sad about that, because I wonder how society then perceives those people. Are they seen as maybe of having less, being able to do something in a lesser way because their writing is not seen as being of form? Whilst that might not be the case, it's the perception that puts out.
Yeah, and it's a difficult topic because nobody wants to put someone down for their inability to craft an email, right? But what we're talking about here is the importance of that for any chance of getting into a job. For any chance of being successful in the workplace, you have to be able to do these things. This is important. And of course, it all comes back to that key word, which is literacy. Now, I think I know the answer you're going to give me here, but, the question we've been bouncing around for a long time on this show, and I ask it for various reasons, which we can talk about, is Braille literacy?
So for me, Braille is literacy, but I understand that's not the case for everyone. I've heard the many contributions on your show, and maybe who is anyone to say that somebody is is illiterate or not literate because they don't read a particular format. Maybe listening to an audiobook, you know, people say I'm reading, and you know, sure, like what's wrong with that? Um, I like the privacy of Braille. I like the fact that somebody can. It's so nice to still receive a Braille Christmas card. There's the little things that people go to the trouble of putting something in Braille using a Perkins Brailler, which is another reason, of course, that when Greg came out with the Paige Braille device, I mean, that was another great way to almost revive the Perkins. There's so many things that you can connect when you think about Braille.
Yeah, and this is the bit that intrigued me about your device, probably more than anything else, Greg. I mean, I've heard about a lot of great tech around Braille, and we'll talk about some of that a bit later. But, you know, when I heard about your device, I thought, goodness me, you've really connected with what I consider to be real people, right? People who are going to be using this Perkins device, that is probably going to be, for many people, not everybody, but for many people, the first interaction they had with Braille. I know if you go to any Braille class, I was fortunate enough to go to a Braille class a couple of years ago. And, you know, I'm fortunate to have a Perkins Braille display because of someone who kindly donated one to the RNIB in the UK, and I was able to get access to that. And that was brilliant because I had access then to the machine that would allow me to read and write Braille, which is actually something even more powerful than a Braille display can give you, right? I mean, you know, well, to some degree, I suppose. But you have to have the training. This is the key. You have to have the training. You have to have the learning to go with it. Now, for many people, and I would say the majority here, Stuart, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think the vast majority of people who would be benefiting from some kind of Braille, albeit perhaps grade 1 and only grade 1, will be those later in life who are losing their sight, which is a huge number of people. And they could benefit from this, right? I'm not saying they will benefit from it, or they could, or they even would want to. That's another story. And I've had plenty of contributions saying, you know, you seriously expect someone who's going through that process, who's just been told they're losing their sight, to jump on the Braille bandwagon? No, of course not. But let's be real. We want to upskill people, and we all want to upskill ourselves.
And if you want a real world example of that, Stephen, if there are people, let's say, again, we're talking about people who may be older, and considering that we're all going to live longer and we'll all probably need more medication as we age. And if you learn Braille for no other reason than to read your medication, isn't that a good thing?
Well, that's a perfect example, actually, of my mother, unfortunately, is unable to seek out her own medication now and sort it out. And I was really pleased to be able to read the medicine boxes, and being able to do that meant a lot. I mean, I will say I've learned to spell lots of words as a result of that.
Yeah.
I had no idea how to spell paracetamol before that, and I learned, which is again perhaps goes to your point about understanding the language, and also not just relying on spell check when you're typing. So I'll type close enough to it and hope it figures it out. You know, that kind of thing that I'm sure a lot of us do.
I had a few thoughts on it. It seems to bring together a few different things in terms of when you're talking about literacy, and often there's the kind of like Braille is literacy shorthand for all of these arguments. I kind of wish there was more people giving tangible examples of like Braille for this or Braille for that, so that somebody learning is like motivated to do that thing rather than sort of Braille for Braille's sake, which I think is less motivating for you. And I think the other one you mentioned was talking about like grade 1. Like if we could just get people over the grade 1 kind of bump, it might be a much easier thing to kind of just nudge people into it. And then they'll realize kind of how useful it is for all these different things that you're talking about. And then literacy as well, I think, is quite a sensitive topic, because of course you're not illiterate if you go blind later in life and you've been literate your entire life. You don't suddenly become illiterate because you don't know Braille. And so I think it's people blobbing everyone together and then saying, oh, only 10% learn Braille or know Braille, and then saying therefore it's useless. And I think that's a really damaging sort of argument, or always saying Braille is in crisis. It's kind of endured for 200 years, and it's phenomenally useful for a subset of blind users. And so I think sometimes it's an unhelpful way of framing it, of like it's always in crisis, it's always an unuseful skill kind of thing.
Can I say, and I completely agree with Greg, I just wanted to mention one of the things I'd like to, and I think we'd all like to see more of, is just more current research being done around Braille usage now. I just happened
100%.
to glance this morning that the RNIB have produced a report for Braille 200, and they're looking at usage within the UK, and it's something I need to read and have a bit of a think about, because it's great to see that coming out. But a lot of the things that we talk about before, that people who use Braille have a greater chance of getting employment, and look, the people I know who use Braille definitely have, but I'm not saying that's exclusively the case, and we need more research to tell us whether that's the case. A lot of the research I've looked at from the States in particular is, it's mid-90s, it's almost 30 years ago. And it would be good to know where we are now, because technology has evolved an awful lot. And are people, because I'm sure there are people who are very successfully doing all sorts of different careers, maybe using Braille, but also maybe not.
There seems to be a staunch defense of Braille in that, and I hear this a lot from what I might call the militant blind amongst us, and there are many, who, will stand up, and quite rightly, for Braille. They will stand up for it, and they will say, if you don't know Braille, you're illiterate. And obviously, I think what they are referring to there, I hope they're referring to, is exactly to your point, Greg, not to people who are losing their sight later in life, because, of course, they are literate. I mean, I was taught visually at school. I lost that. And the way I describe that to people is, and this is a visual reference, so I apologize to blind people for this, but in the movie Back to the Future, there's a bit where Marty McFly is looking at a picture from the past, and someone disappears from that picture because they've been erased from the past or whatever, and in the future they're no longer there or whatever it is. And so they actually disappear from the movie, a way that Google Pixel phone might be able to do that today in real life. And I say that's a bit like how I think about language. I think about words and I see letters disappear from them, and then it gets to the point I can't remember what they were. So I'm losing some sense of literacy, but I'm not illiterate. But you're absolutely right, Stuart. The research is key, and it doesn't seem to be up to date. So a lot of the arguments, those staunch defenders, are looking at old research at a time when those people who would be learning Braille would have pretty much that was the only access they had to printed materials. A lot has changed in the last 40 years, and the current research doesn't seem to fit that narrative. Now, the question is, what changes as a result of that research coming back and saying, well, actually, more people now are using audio technology rather than Braille, and actually those numbers of Braille are low. And success rate is also high in education and employment. What does that say?
I think also there are, and again, the research would need to expand upon this, I suppose. But there are, and certainly here in Ireland, and I think probably in the UK as well, there was a trend maybe 20 plus years ago to certainly steer people more towards using audio-based learning tools, whether that was back in the days of cassettes or CDs, or using technology back then and not really using Braille at all. Now I see that quite differently. There's a lot of people who are using a mix of Braille and verbal screen readers and whatever, and kind of they are dipping in and out of Braille for various different things. So people who use multi modal ways of learning, if you like, are using Braille for some things and are using technology or synthetic speech, or they might be using magnification for other things. You have dual learners, as we call them.
Yeah, and it's interesting that in the conversation this week, we've been talking about just that, this idea of dual learning being something that is quite well used as a method in some countries, not in others. So you have this spread as well around the world, don't you, of different levels of access. And of course, we tend to talk about this from our perspectives here in the West. But of course, when you think about India, you think about Africa, it's an entirely different picture, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, some people there are, would be grateful to have a slate and stylus.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Braille technology being expensive, and you're right. It's all relative.
Well, that's right. It is. But it's it's a great conversation to have, and it's why I think here on the show we are very keen to have what I call the real conversation, the honest conversation about Braille. I want it to survive. There are people who are convinced I want it to die. I don't. I want to open up a serious conversation among smart people, not me, to say, look, we need this to survive. And for me, the two issues at the moment that I see in front of me is going by the stats, going by what I'm hearing, and I want to pick up on some information you might have on this, Greg, in a minute. But, talking to people who are in education, who are basically saying, well, if you're blind, you might learn Braille, but if you're low vision, you might not, which to me cuts down a huge number of potential users of Braille in the future. Take retinitis pigmentosa as one key example of that, a condition which will worsen through time. And if a child may not need Braille in that moment, they may well use the skills later in life. And I can tell you, and I've said this, I don't know how many times on this show, and I'll say it one more time. I, in my own experience, learned grade 1 at school, and I didn't use it. But when I went back to it 20 years later, or thereabouts, I put my fingers on the Braille, and I knew what the bumps were. I was like, oh, I remember this. And it came back to me. It was all in there. And that's why I've been campaigning for so long to say not just blind children should learn Braille, low vision children should learn Braille. But that coupled with costs, and I admit that the costs of Braille equipment has come down over the years. If you look over the decades, it has come down, but it's still unreachable for a lot of people. There's a chasm growing here between these two. And that's the bit that concerns me, because if there aren't enough people learning it and the cost is not achievable for people to get access to the equipment to use it, then Braille will die. Am I right or wrong?
I have quite a lot of thoughts about this whole topic, and it's a very complicated topic. And so the first thing I'll say is the lack of stats. I completely agree with. It's one of the frustrations we had when we were first researching this, is that I'd read these papers and they would quote this 10% stat, and you would try and look in the references and you try and trace down where is this coming from. And I thought I was going mad initially, because I was like, I cannot find where they're getting this statistic from. And there was a phenomenal paper that came out from a woman called Rebecca Sheffield, who's with the US Department of Education, called How Many Braille Readers, Policy, Politics and Perception. And she basically showed that this stat was completely Chinese whispers type thing, where it was completely baseless. It is, the fact is we just don't really know. So it's hard to make arguments about Braille either increasing or declining, because we don't even know how many there are at one point in time. And it's then also a really complicated conversation, because obviously you've got people losing their sight at different ages and different stages of their education. So you can't really make these broad statements about literate and illiterate and impact on their employment and things like that. And so it's just such a nuanced topic. And I think you can take it to its extremes and say, if you have somebody blind from birth, should they just learn with audio? And then it becomes a bit more clear cut. You can kind of make the argument for, look, Braille would be phenomenally impactful for this person. But it isn't that clear cut, because you just have this incredibly difficult and nuanced thing. And I think the main point for me is that Braille is useful for some people, and it's one of the tools in their toolkit, and it's an enduring tool that has proved itself to be useful over time. And so I think, it's just such a difficult topic.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with all that's said, and I think Greg's point about the toolkit, because we all, as visually impaired people, you need that toolkit. You need all these things that you can pull out for various different tasks. So if I want to read an email quickly, I'll listen to it with synthetic speech. But if I want to digest something, especially if I'm studying, or if I'm preparing something, I have to have it on Braille. I find synthetic speech, I switch off. If I put on an audiobook at night, I will listen to books for pleasure, but if I put on an audiobook at night, I'm lucky to get 10 minutes out of it before I go to sleep, Oh,
thank you for saying that. Honestly, what is it about blind people and books? I often find this quite an interesting thing. People say to me, what, you don't listen to audiobooks? And I'm like, well, I try, but I fall asleep. I only have time to listen to them at night. And I would guarantee you, I can barely get through an episode of a 30-minute podcast. And usually I hear the following. I hear, Coming up, great guest you want to hear, and you don't want to miss this interview. And then I wake up at, thank you for joining us, and that's it. That's all I get. So thank you for saying that, because I'm not the only one.
Yeah, but I think we need to know more about what's happening and who's learning Braille and where the challenges are. And to your point about cost, Stephen, I mean, cost is always an issue, and people who are manufacturing Braille displays, and I can really say this, are genuinely trying to make it as cost effective as possible. And people who have gone out and tried to make new Braille displays using new technology wanted and still want the cost to be as low as possible, but it creeps up, and it creeps up very quickly. And there's been lots of reasons for that. Some of it is to do with supply and to do with manufacturing, and some of it has been, or at least part of it has been to do with Brexit. And who knows next year what's going to happen with changes that might happen in the US.
Yeah, well, we come back to that, but I have to say, it's not a problem that lives in its isolation. It's not just about bringing the cost down, because that doesn't solve the problem either. If you bring the cost down of a Braille display, if HumanWare turned around tomorrow and said, let's just bring the price down, we'll knock $2,000 or £2,000 off the price, it doesn't solve the problem. All it does is create an issue for HumanWare, which might end up putting them out of business, and we don't want that either. We don't want any of these businesses to get out of business as a result of this. We want them to make money. What you need is an increase in market share, right? So you need more people, you need more customers, and ultimately that's the point. If we can get more people buying this technology, the cost will come down overall. And what that means is get more people using Braille. Now, to that point, there is a device that came out a couple of years ago which did surprise a lot of people because of its ease of use. And also what surprised me about it was the number of people buying it who didn't read Braille. And that was the Hable 1. Now, tell me, Stuart, from your perspective at Sight and Sound, what sales have been like for that device and what the people have been saying.
Yeah, and you make an interesting point about people purchase the Hable 1 who don't read Braille. Or certainly going back to that term I used earlier, lapsed Braille users. I haven't done Braille in ages, but this might help me to use it again. And a lot of people who were learning Braille, going back to your talking about, learning grade 1, people were using the Hable for that. But the reason some people who were not Braille users purchased this is because the Hable is not just a keyboard. Of course, it is known as a Bluetooth controller. So you can kind of control your phone. You don't actually have to know Braille to use the Hable if you just want to control your phone, like play and pause your audio, or maybe open the phone app and scroll down through your contacts. Obviously, you need to know Braille if you want to use the Hable to write a message. It's been a very popular product. I think to some degree it might have reached a bit of saturation, because a lot of people who really wanted that device and who are using it religiously and who love it have probably got it into their hands at this stage. But the guys in Hable, I think, have plans. I know they've been on your show previously, Stephen, and they have, I think, lots of ideas for the future. So it's definitely one to watch. And again, just like Greg, there's another example of sighted guys, Frake and his colleagues, who are just passionate about Braille.
Now, Greg, I don't know if you're aware of the Hable 1. I'm sure you are, because you've been researching a lot. Yeah, because you've been researching a lot into this, and obviously for building your own product. But the Paige Braille is kind of similar in a way, because it's enabling someone to use a Perkins to connect to the computer, and it could be a learning aid, right? That's one of the benefits of it, and not just as we discussed the last time. It's not just about writing the Braille. It's about being able to read it back off the display, but also hear back as well. So it's quite a powerful piece of kit you've developed there.
Thanks. And I think the Hable 1 is, phenomenally interesting as a product. And I think the thing you said about price was quite interesting as well, in terms of it's very easy to zero in on price as being the only issue and thinking, if only this was all cheaper, everything would be fixed. But there's just so many other barriers to Braille as well, which is this kind of perception that it's this like very hard thing to learn or very complicated. And I think if there was more emphasis on grade 1, then maybe that would help nudge people into it as well, potentially. And also having to seek out kind of a dedicated tutor to try and learn. With the Hable one, it's like you're supposed to learn it yourself and be able to get going instantly. And there's this level of kind of intuitiveness to it. And that's something that we wanted to kind of mirror with Page Connect, but also giving people that hard copy output so they can actually learn to touch read alongside it. So yeah, it's a phenomenally interesting product.
And the other thing, and just to speak to Greg's point there about kind of learning Braille, sometimes I see in the Braille world, there might be a certain pressure, and I don't think it's meant to be pressure, but people feel the pressure because there's some talk sometimes about reading speed. Oh, how fast can you read Braille? What's your reading speed? Do you know something? It doesn't matter. And Greg mentioning grade 1 and you mentioning grade 1, if you never pass by grade 1, that's fine. If it works for you, if you can read your medication or you can read whatever it is, the key thing I think for people who are adults learning Braille is to find a hook, find a reason to learn Braille. So if you like to cook and maybe you want to label all your spices or you want to get a cookery book in Braille, then that might be all you need. Or going back to your example, Stephen, of the medication for your mum, that has helped you. And it's just to find that hook. But I don't like the idea that people feel then pressured or feel, well, I mustn't be that good because I can't read as fast as the next person. It doesn't matter.
It does not matter at all. I mean, ultimately, if you are aiming to get to a level where you can read read for a presentation, as I must admit, I kind of thought at first when I was starting to learn it, I thought, this would be great if I'm doing a presentation on stage or I'm talking on stage, I can take my notes with me. And now I'm thinking that's not going to happen because look, real life gets in the way when you're an adult. Okay, it's not as simple as when you're a child. You're forced into a room and told sit there for an hour and do this. You can't necessarily, unless you have the time, and I know some people do, and I follow lots of people on social who will say to me, I sat last night for an hour reading a book, and I think that's brilliant for you, good for you, and you should be proud of yourself for doing that. That is a fantastic thing. But for a lot of people, it's like you say, the entry point can seem a little bit distant. I must admit, even from, and we'll maybe talk about the Braille displays here, because when I first got into the world of Braille, when I first started getting into it, I immediately felt like I was missing some kind of degree to understand how this technology worked. Like when someone said to me, just press a thumb key. I'm like, what the hell's a thumb key? What does that mean? I'm looking for an actual key somewhere that's got a thumbprint in it. I'm like, what's going on? I'm in the box. I'm like, I can't find this thing. What are you talking about? It was like another language that came up. And then, of course, you plugged it into the computer and all these weird symbols started appearing. I'm like, what's going on here? And it took me a little while, and it's taken me time to adjust to all of this. But it does feel a little bit like a secret society in some ways. And I think that's part of the problem, is that it's a system, the whole system of Braille and Braille displays and Braille technology is built for people who've been used to it. It's not been built for those of us who are coming to it later in life, who can easily just pick this stuff up. You're struggling with the words on the display, never mind all the rest of it.
Yeah, and maybe, Stephen, call me old school if you like, and the listeners can as well. I'm not sure that even for people coming to Braille later in life, I'm not sure that starting on a Braille display is the best way to learn it, for all the reasons that you've talked about. And unless there's some training going to be, provided as part of that package, or there's a way for you to get help quickly. There are some really good Braille materials that are available on paper, and I really do, I would give a shout out for the Brailleist Foundation Braille for Beginners course, because that's a really robust and well structured series of learning. Because there's a lot of talk as well about people who prefer to read, or the different experience, let's say, of reading Braille on paper versus Braille display. So all those things are going to the mix.
That's something that we also found really kind of interesting, is seeing the progression of people of learning Braille, where they might just start with hard copy resources, maybe start with a Perkins, then move on to a simple Braille display, and then kind of go from there. And it is overwhelming if you immediately get confronted with this like multi-1,000-pound device that can be used alongside a screen reader in all these intricate ways with all these keyboard shortcuts. And it's like a high bar to try and pass. And so with Page Connect, that is the idea, is we want to catch people just when they're starting, just when they're kind of curious, and then get them the ball rolling kind of thing for the Braille. So yeah, it's very interesting watching the progression of people learning Braille and what devices they use at what stage.
It's important to remind listeners as well of the reason that Paige Braille came about, essentially, because you were designing this multi-purpose display, this fantastic display, high quality, ideally low cost, and then you pivoted. And the reason for that was because you had spoken to TVIs, teachers of visually impaired children. Tell us about their response to this device.
Well, this was like a kind of very striking moment for us because we'd slaved away for, I think, about 18 months by that point, building this very complex thing. And then we snapped it off and built this board literally in about a couple of months, and then showed them this sort of horrible prototype we built, and they went absolutely nuts for it. And they were immediately saying, "Can we buy 10 of them?" And this was something that this was like the real moment for us where we thought, oh, this is what we should be building instead, because this is where the need is really. And so, yeah, that was quite like a defining moment for us as a team.
So what was the need that the device was filling? What wasn't there for them? Because, I mean, you think of all the technology we have today, what wasn't there? What was it they needed?
I think many things. So the majority of students are being taught in mainstream schools where they're just alongside sighted people who don't know the first thing about Braille, definitely don't know how to read it. And so being able to mirror what they're embossing instantly in print is something that would like instantly connect them to the sighted teachers that they're having to work alongside. And also what surprised us as well is the TVIs themselves wanting to use the product to actually learn Braille themselves, which also surprised us. And so I think just demystifying Braille is just so important. I think it's just seen as this very rarefied, complicated thing. And I think just having that hook of like you whack a dot one and you see an A, and being able to have that spoken to you by your screen reader, and having this like multimodal way of learning with like visual, print, audio, the embossed Braille all combined is kind of what the kind of appeal of the product was.
If I can add to that, because I've seen a couple of people getting very excited, just as Greg says, about the Paige Connect. Certainly for younger kids in school, where a teacher might be working with a young child and they're not ready yet for a note taker, they're on a Perkins, and there is that learning curve for a specialist teacher or a resource teacher or somebody in a mainstream school to try to understand how the Perkins is working. And schools are busy places and people don't often have the time. So making the Perkins smart with Paige, with the Paige Connect, is just such a simple thing. And the other beauty of it is that you don't need training. You don't need, you set this thing up and off you go.
Yeah.
I think it's the whole beauty of the Paige Connect is in its simplicity.
And let's be honest, schools are struggling financially as well. We have to talk about that aspect of it, right? So budgets are being cut left, right, and center. If you can essentially take that tool that's already there, something that may already be sitting in a cupboard somewhere, and bring it to life in this new way, that, of course, I'm guessing is another aspect here.
I think also what you said about the Hable One in terms of it almost is like a mainstream product in terms of it's a much more intuitive thing to get going with. And that's something that we were really trying to do with Paige Connect as well, as in just plug it in, connect it, and it just should work for you. Because that is the standard in mainstream products. You're not expected to read through like an enormous manual to even get started, or to have somebody looking over your shoulder telling you what to do. We did want the bar to be like, this should be intuitive and quick and easy to get started with. And
Stuart, talk me through. Sorry, Greg.
Oh, very sorry. It occurred to me as well. The thing that also shocked us is the amount of TVIs in schools, alongside all the other things they're doing, which they're doing a phenomenal job on, having to support the tech that's out there as well, which kind of shocked us because we thought the onus will be on us doing the support, and it was
we're struggling, right?
Yeah, like it kind of shocked us because we were like, well, we were expecting to do all this tech support, and there you are, kind of actually supporting products in schools, which kind of bowled us over as well, like the number of things they're doing.
That's a really good point.
We see support all the time. And I think what I will always say about schools is, as we've all said, they are busy places. People are overworked. They're under-resourced, all that stuff. But you just need to find somebody in a school who takes a bit of ownership for the technology, whatever that technology is. You'll always find somebody who's interested in the technology. That may not be the class teacher, because they just may not be that person, but it's somebody who sort of says, yeah, this is kind of interesting stuff. And then that's somebody that we or Greg or whoever can work with, from afar to support them when that support is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Stuart, talk me through where we're at in terms of the future side of Braille devices, because of course the big talk in 2024 was around multi-line displays. Now that talk has continued from 2022 and 2023 because, device in particular like the Monarch has been in production now for a long time, and it finally was realized in 2024 into a saleable product by Humanware. Talk us through where we're at with all of this, because the technology is in some ways new, but is it revolutionary or is it evolutionary of Braille?
I think it's evolutionary. I mean, I guess it's both, but it's interesting that you sort of said 20, and you're right, 2022, 23, 24, and I think in 25, we're still going to be talking about multi-line Braille displays. So, and I think Humanware are to be commended. I mean, the Monarch is a lovely device, and I had a chance to be hands-on with it a couple of weeks ago. It's a really nice device, and they've done a really good job. There's really interesting things happening with Dot as well in Korea, and the Dot pad. Obviously, Bristol Braille are doing great work with their Canute devices, and Orbit in the US. Orbit Research obviously have the Slate devices. These are all, and they all meet a different need, I suppose. And depending on what you want from your multi-line Braille display. And that's, I guess, in terms of size and functionality and portability. One of the challenges we still have on the screen reader side is that how screen readers communicate with multi-line Braille displays, and this is changing. I should add. So by the time people listen to this and someone says this is not true, because it may have changed, but how screen readers communicate with Braille displays, I think, still needs a bit of work. And in most cases, for example, if you have a multi-line Braille display, only the top line of that multi-line display is fed content from the screen reader. So you might as well just have a single line display. The multi-line devices obviously are really good when you're loading content into them and when they're operating as standalone devices. So, loading books onto a device like that. But it is exciting. I think there'll always be, and certainly for the foreseeable future, there will be a place for that single line display as well. Much more portable, much easier to carry around. Not everybody needs multi-line. Some people have developed all sorts of strategies to do very innovative things with single line Braille displays, both from a user perspective and from the manufacturer. So some of the screen readers have done interesting things with single line display to give a semi multi-line feel, if you like. But it's going to be one to watch in 2025 as well.
It's one area, and I'm talking about Braille generally here, it's one area that AI doesn't seem to be able to penetrate to give it any benefit, really, isn't it? It's, of all the things we talk about, I talk often about how AI floods every single area of tech. Braille, not so much.
ChatGPT is hope when you talk to it about Braille, isn't it? Like, I was quite disappointed.
That's another story, right? The information it brings up about it, exactly. Well, I mean, I remember back at the beginning when ChatGPT OpenAI was launched, and I was they apologized to me because I was blind, and I thought that was quite amusing.
Oh God.
And this is, I mean, I know we're at a very early stage, but AI can't really get into the Braille world, can it? It doesn't work because it's physical.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the hard thing about Braille is that it is physical, and so actually getting those Braille dots under someone's fingers is the real challenge. And yeah, I think with Page Connect, that was the kind of motivation as well, is like cheaply getting the dots under someone's fingers so they can actually start that kind of learning loop. And I think the way you framed it is quite true in terms of how can we capture more of these groups. Like, how can you capture low vision people? How can you capture older people? And I think all of this comes back to this ease. Like, if Braille was an easy thing to pick up, then that would potentially capture more of these people. And it's not just price that's blocking people. It is all of these like others blocking people into getting into Braille, like trying to seek out dedicated teachers and things like that. So I think if we can lower all of these barriers across the board, then I think you could start to capture more of these groups that are currently harder to reach for Braille.
As somebody who supports AI, and look, like the rest of us, have had all sorts of uses for AI over the last while, and I'm still blown away by all the things it can do. I'm very glad it hasn't entered Braille just yet, because I'm not. I think I'm a bit scared by, because I'm sure somebody could knock up an AI Braille translator very quickly, and
I
then where
think
I'm
does that
actually,
leave us?
as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm thinking, wouldn't it be a great tutor?
I think Dot Incorporation
It could
has
be.
got AI Braille translation, but apparently the feedback I've heard is that with LibLouis or these other Braille translators, it will make errors, but the errors are very repetitive, so you can kind of spot them. Whereas with this AI translation, they're more sporadic and random, so it's harder to sort of catch the errors. But I am wondering whether there would be more impact of it on kind of screen readers and things, where screen readers, one of the things that people kind of notice about them is that they're quite verbose sometimes. And so if there was some way to use AI to kind of like squash down some of the stuff on the screen, I don't really know. I'm kind of like making things up here, but it feels like there should be some sort of impact somewhere.
Well, I'm just thinking about the idea of it being a tutor, right? So the idea of it, potentially, let's think about Paige Braille, for example, right? You're typing on your Perkins, you get something wrong. It can tell you've got it wrong. It can, give you information on how to correct it. We see this in the sort of mainstream world of, someone knocking up an IKEA unit and they hold their phone over it and it tells them where to put the screws and where to use a hammer. And, it's kind of got that capability, it would seem, through the computer vision angle, which we're seeing, we saw the tail end of 2024 develop and emerge. Yeah, it's just a thought. I'm just thinking, if you're not busy, Greg, you might want to knock one of those up. Yeah, get the AI Braille tutor on the go. That'd be pretty cool.
Next year's product for you, Greg.
Yeah, because our learning content is currently very structured, and it does give you that kind of instant feedback of how to correct things. But having this kind of, we have discussed before doing more like text-based games or things that are a bit more like you said, a bit more responsive and open-ended, instead of this very structured curriculum that we currently have.
Yeah, but accuracy is key, right? So I think we'd probably trust what you've done over AI at this point, because like Stuart says, this is an area where hallucinations happen all the time. And, if you're learning something, you really don't need that to be falling into the mix. Stuart, let me ask you a little bit about tariffs, because, of course, we're heading into the year when, Donald Trump takes office. He's made it very clear in the US that he wants to bring in tariffs. That is going to have a huge impact on everything. But of course, in an area we're already talking about cost of devices, it's going to have a huge impact potentially on the assistive tech market, right?
Yeah, I think it is. And look, at the risk of, I suppose, at the moment we just don't know, and we also don't know. He has obviously, as you said, he has made some very clear statements, and he has been very clear about what he wants to do. Whether all that will come to pass when he takes office, we don't know. But yes, it's going to be, it could potentially be very tricky. And I'm speaking as somebody who, we went through a fairly challenging time at the beginning of Brexit a couple of years ago, to the point that we couldn't get any movement to ship technology between Ireland and the UK. We couldn't get any movement to ship technology between the Netherlands and the UK for weeks upon weeks, and you have people waiting on stuff. And, crucially, you have schools waiting on stuff. You have learners who are, every day they miss a piece of technology or they miss that access is crucial. But look, we don't know yet, but it has the potential to cause a lot of disruption and to also impact the price negatively.
Greg, from your perspective, I guess you want to get Paige Braille out there to more people, ideally out to more markets. The US is a huge market. Slapping tariffs on a company like yours in order to import into the US, does that kill the chance of you getting that product out there, do you think?
So funnily enough, there's actually, in the US, there is a dedicated, this is getting a bit in the weeds, but there's a thing called like HDS codes. So it's you kind of categorizing your product. In the US, there's a unique HDS code for blind products that are specifically for blind people. And so that's like a Chapter 98 HDS code. And then you also have to give the categorization of the product with another HDS code. And then I think there's, in some small print deep within the these very long documents, if you've got a Chapter 98 HTS code, I think some of them mean that you're exempt from the tariffs. And so this is all very, so I think it might be that you can sidestep it with certain classifications of product, because I don't think they do want to slap these like incredibly high tariffs on products for the blind.
Well, that would be obviously wonderful if that's the case, right?
And
that's only going to really, well, it will, I say only, but it will impact on Braille displays and that kind of technology. It's not going to impact on an iPhone or an Android phone, right? Which is, for most people, is still going to rise in price, irrespective. Because at the end of the day, whatever people say about tariffs, it's the consumer that pays. It's been such an interesting conversation. I mean, it does feel, despite what I say and despite what people think I say on this show, I believe in Braille. I think Braille is brilliant. I think, what Greg said right at the top about it being here for 200 years and it seems to always live in a state of crisis, I think is a great way to describe it. And it's a great viewpoint on it because I think it does tend to live. Every year we talk about, will Braille survive another year? And of course it does, and we just move on. But there are some significant challenges, there's no doubt. And that's why I'm very keen to bring up those challenges and talk about them. But I think, Stuart, it's fair to say that Braille is going to be here potentially another 200 years.
I certainly hope so, Stephen. And I think, let's think on a positive note as we draw this to a close as well. Like, we're going to spend the next year, there's all sorts of things being planned, I think, all over the world, people celebrating 200 years of Braille. Let's just champion that and say, something, this is great. Those of us who use Braille are clearly, making good use of it. Those of us, or those people who are learning Braille, should be supported by those of us who use Braille and others to make sure that they have the resources and tools and support that they need. And people like Greg and the people from Hable and all the other people within our community who are going out there and doing great things should be commended and continuously supported to continue to do great things.
100%. And Greg, if you can just get that AI Braille tutor built for us in the next 6 months, that'd be amazing.
I was going to say within the next 3 weeks, Stephen.
Well, even better, yeah. I'm just giving him a bit more time, but okay, fine. 3 weeks it is. Greg and Stuart, thank you so much for being with me this hour. It's been a really interesting conversation celebrating 200 years of Braille.
Thanks so much for having us.
And that's it for today. Thank you, as always, for tuning in and listening and watching, however you choose to consume the show. We're back tomorrow, and we're diving into the inbox to get your thoughts on the future of Braille.